Morning. I'm thankful for the opportunity to deliver a lesson from God's Word this morning to you. You'll have the privilege of hearing Luke tonight. I've had the idea bounce around in my head here lately about steadfastness. So that's what we're going to talk about this morning. And we see that idea, um, that word steadfast a lot in the Bible, but sometimes it's also um, translated faithfulness. You'll see those together, faithfulness, steadfastness. And I get interested in words and where they come from and stuff, so I will go ahead and give us a definition. Um, Unswerving, firmly fixed in place, immovable, not subject to change. It's actually a compound word. Um, it's spelled a little differently, but it's basically steadfast. It's kind of remained unchanged for centuries, which is convenient for its name. The word stead means place. And so I never thought about that, but we hear of a homestead or somebody serving in my stead, in my place. And then fast literally means fixed. And we've heard that when we talk about holding fast or holding firm or fixed. So it literally means to be fixed or to stay in place. And it was originally first used in a battle context with warriors who stood their ground. Then, it was used to describe like a castle in a storm being firmly fixed in place, steadfast. And since then, now it's attributed to not just physically standing firm, but our character and faith and loyalty and devotion. And so when we're talking about remaining steadfast, that's the idea we're talking about. And get my notes in the right place here. Cooper read in 2 Peter, for this reason, make every effort to supplement your faith with virtue, and virtue with knowledge, and knowledge with self-control, and self-control with steadfastness, and steadfastness with godliness. And so that's one of the things that we are to supplement our faith. In 1 Corinthians chapter 15:58, this part of Paul's letter to that church always stays in my mind near the end of that letter. Therefore, my beloved brothers, be steadfast, immovable, always abounding in the work of the Lord, knowing that in the Lord your labor is not in vain. I like that he literally defines it. He's got synonyms right next to it. Steadfast, immovable, always abounding. And that adds a little bit of a different understanding that it doesn't mean lacking in activity or motion. Laziness. Steadfastness is not laziness. It's firmness. It's immovable. But to be steadfast takes action. We should always be abounding. We should have our labor in the Lord, which isn't in vain. And so a lot of times if we think, well, I'm just coasting and staying, well, you're probably moving backwards. In order to remain steadfast in the Lord, we need to be growing and abounding in that work. So there is an active principle in our steadfastness here. James chapter 1, I'm going to start in verse 12. Blessed is the man who remains steadfast under trial, for when he has stood the test, he will receive the crown of life, which God has promised to those who love him. I got to thinking about that synonym, immovable. Well, it's easy to not be moved if there's no force acting on you, if nothing is trying to move you. So a lot of times, as I reflected on myself, where I thought I may have been steadfast, I was probably just unchallenged. James says, blessed is the man who remains. It takes effort to stay steadfast under trial. And then he says, he has stood the test. He will receive the crown of life. So let's not mistake it. If we don't have any tests or trials, then we can't really measure our steadfastness. Earlier in James chapter 1, we read about those trials, don't we? Verse 2, count it all joy, my brothers, when you meet trials of various kinds, for you know that the testing of your faith produces steadfastness. Some may translate that to patience. So we want to be steadfast. Well, we need to welcome the tests and the trials that produce that test our faith. And I'd love to be patient and steadfast, but I have a hard time counting it all joy when I meet those trials of various kinds. Verse 4, right there in James, the very next verse. And let steadfastness have its full effect. So you're like, okay, I was steadfast that once. I did a good job. Let it have its full effect, that you may be perfect and complete, lacking in nothing. If I'm so comfortable and I don't face any trials, and I thought, well, this is easy to be steadfast, I'm probably incomplete. I'm probably lacking in understanding and patience and strong faith. First Timothy chapter 6, verse 11. But as for you, O man of God, flee these things, pursue righteousness, godliness, faith, love, steadfastness, and gentleness. Those are the things we're supposed to pursue. But we're supposed to flee the things previously mentioned. Let's back up to verse 9 of 1 Timothy 6. But those who desire to be rich fall into temptation, into a snare, into many senseless and harmless desires that plunge people into ruin and destruction. For the love of money is the root of all kinds of evil. It is through this craving that some have wandered away from the faith and pierced themselves with many pains. That goes to a point brought up in class about wandering away from the faith. That's a possibility. Why all the warnings and pleadings to be steadfast, to remain, if you can't lose it, if you can't drift away? So the idea of being immovable, I want us to recognize from the main point in all of this is not just remaining, continuing, being unwavering, but realize that we will be moved. Something will be acting on us to try to move us. So we will actively need to try to take effort to be steadfast, to hold fast, to be faithful. That there is no steadfastness without an opposing force. I do think, as Justin just mentioned before our offering, how blessed we are. We face very few trials and temptations and tribulations and difficulties to test our faith. And then paradoxically, I think maybe our comfort and our ease and our privileges may be the temptation. That may be the test. The lack of trials is the trial, I guess. At least it is for me. I get frustrated and impatient, and then I think, I'm dealing with so very little compared to examples that we see of those who are steadfast, who are firm. And I thought, man, and I crumble under the smallest little inconvenience. I first want to look at how God demonstrates his steadfastness. This would be a different slide I've had a PowerPoint. When we look at God being described as steadfast, I'm first going to look in Deuteronomy chapter 5 and verse 9. And this is the part of the Ten Commandments right after it's talking about not worshiping idols. Deuteronomy 5:9 says, You shall not bow down to them or serve them, for I, the Lord your God, am a jealous God, visiting the iniquity of the fathers on the children to the third and fourth generation of those who hate me, but showing steadfast love to thousands of those who love me and keep my commandments. So we can see here God's steadfastness in his love. There's several Psalms where David talks about God's steadfastness. Psalm 26, the first 3 verses. Vindicate me, O Lord, for I have walked in my integrity and I have trusted in the Lord without wavering. He's describing his own steadfastness. Prove me, O Lord, and try me. Test my heart and my mind, for your steadfast love is before my eyes, and I walk in your faithfulness. Notice here, he welcomes the trials and the test. Try me, test my heart. He's saying, I followed you, I haven't wavered, and test me. Look for yourself. And then he realizes God's steadfast love. Psalm 25, verse 10, All the paths of the Lord are steadfast love and faithfulness for those who keep his covenant and his testimonies. Sounds very similar to in Deuteronomy, the steadfast love for those who love him and keep his commandments. Psalm 51, Have mercy on me, O God, according to your steadfast love. According to your abundant mercy, blot out my transgressions. Wash me thoroughly from my iniquity and cleanse me from my sin. He's asking for mercy. But why does he even ask? Why does he even have any thought or hope that he would get any? According to your steadfast love, according to your abundant mercy. He has seen God's love and knows that it doesn't change. It's continuous, never ends. And so that gives him hope that his iniquity and his transgressions will be blotted out and cleansed. Psalm 86, starting in verse 12. I give thanks to you, O Lord my God, with my whole heart, and I will glorify your name forever. For great is your steadfast love toward me. You have delivered my soul from the depths of Sheol. And we could go on and on about God's steadfast love. And I want you to notice in this section that when we look at God's steadfastness, in a lot of ways, he's unchanging. He's unwavering. He's described as a rock. That could be a whole lesson in itself, couldn't it, this morning? But here in these Psalms especially, it's his steadfast love for us. Repeated over and over. His love for us isn't, well, sometimes, or when they really do something good. He loves us all the time. It's immovable. It's unwavering. And so now we can rely on that. And we rely on things that are reliable, that are immovable. And God's love is that. We can rely on that. If you look over in Hebrews, I got to thinking about in Hebrews chapter 11, so many times when we read Hebrews 11, that we call it the chapter of faith, we see over and over, by faith, so-and-so acted. By faith, so-and-so did this thing. In verse 4, by faith, Abel offered to God. Let's skip down to verse 8. Yeah, by faith, Abraham obeyed when he was called out of the place. But I noticed, starting in verse 9, accompanied with this phrase, by faith, we start to get a little insight on why they did this by faith. Okay, so let's look in verse 9. By faith, he went to live in the land of promise, as in a foreign land, living in tents with Isaac and Jacob, heirs with him of the same promise. So here we see, because of a promise, God promised it. Well, we know he's steadfast. Okay, so we can have faith in God. The next verse, for he was looking forward to the city that has foundations, whose designer and builder is God. So we've got promise, we've got looking forward, and the idea that we're going to start to add here with our steadfastness is hope, is looking ahead, putting our faith in God, having hope. And those two are very closely related. Next verse. By faith, Sarah herself received power to conceive. Now, here's the more information. Even when she was past the age, since she considered him faithful who had promised. So there's God's promises, but she took that into account. He's faithful. When God promised something, it's going to happen. I can rely on it. And so that increased her faith, and she was able to act on that. We're starting to get these words of hope. And to help us explain and understand what hope is, we've heard it explained as desire plus expectation. A lot of times we say, well, I hope this happens. Well, you want it to happen. But I misuse that a lot. I say I hope, and I really don't expect it. I think my kids will say that a lot. I hope we can go do this, or I can buy this. No, you're not. We're not doing it. No. So I know you want to, but there's no hope. Our neighbors, their dog was lost for several days, 4 or 5 days or so. And some of them, anyways, I think the kids still held out hope. But, I mean, there was nothing on Facebook. They've given up hope. Our lab disappeared, and it's been months now. And I say I give up hope, but I still kind of scroll through and look for a missing black lab every once in a while. But I have very little expectation. I have the desire, but I have very little expectation. Our neighbor's dog showed up. And I was like, especially Delilah was like, well, maybe she'll come. Like, she never lost hope. And I thought, good for her. Like, she expected the dog to just show up one day, and it did, just randomly. And I say that because when we get down to verse 16 of Hebrews 11, but as it is, they desire a better country, that is a heavenly one. Therefore, God is not ashamed to be called their God, for he has prepared for them a city. They expected it because of his promise and his faithfulness. And they desired it. They desired a better country, a heavenly one. If we skip all the way down to verse 26, Moses, he considered the reproach of Christ greater wealth than the treasures of Egypt, for he was looking to the reward. So I want us now to connect hope with God's steadfastness and faithfulness. And when we think about adding to our faith, steadfastness, hope is a big part of that. Let's go back one chapter in Hebrews 10, verse 23. Let us hold fast. There's that steadfastness, okay? Let us hold fast the confession of our hope without wavering, for he who promised is faithful. Do you see all that together, working together there in Hebrews 10:23? Hold fast the confession of our hope, which means to not waver, for he who promised is faithful. We can count on that and rely on that. There's many biblical examples of those that have demonstrated steadfastness and faithfulness. And one of the biggest ones, and I think about him a lot just because of what he went through, but recently with the storms last Wednesday night, a big section of one of my chicken barns got blown over by a strong wind. And I thought there was somebody else in the Bible who a strong wind blew over, well, several walls, blew over the whole house. Now, I was had better fortune, and nobody was hurt, and nothing got, no big deal. That's what insurance is for. But Job lost so much, and we don't have the time to go all through Job. But we have a glimpse into something that Job has no idea. He's just living his life, enjoying his friends and family. He's very wealthy. He has a lot of livestock. He's got many servants. Everything looks secure. And while he goes about his day, there's a conversation happening in the spiritual realm. He can't hear or see. And we get a little bit of insight into that. Let's read just a little first part of Job. For time's sake, we'll have to kind of skip. But Satan's wanting, he's looking for people. And God says, have you considered my servant Job? And that's verse 8 of chapter 1. He said, there's none like him anywhere on the earth, blameless and upright man. And Satan says, well, of course, you've protected him with a hedge. Going back to, well, he hasn't really had any trials and tests. He's not really steadfast. He's just got it made easy. Well, Satan's a liar, and that's what he was doing. But God says, well, have at it, to paraphrase. And so let's start in verse 13. Now there was a day when his sons and daughters were eating and drinking wine in their oldest brother's house, and there came a messenger to Job and said, the oxen were plowing and the donkeys feeding beside them, and the Sabaeans fell upon them and took them and struck down the servants with the edge of the sword, and I alone have escaped to tell you. While he was yet speaking, there came another and said, the fire of God fell from heaven and burned up the sheep and servants and consumed them, and I alone have escaped to tell you. While he was yet speaking, there came another and said, the Chaldeans formed 3 groups and made a raid on the camels and took them and struck down the servants with the edge of the sword, and I alone have escaped to tell you. How about getting some bad news? But in verse 18, while he was yet speaking, there came another and said, your sons and daughters were eating and drinking wine in their oldest brother's house, and behold, a great wind came across the wilderness and struck the 4 corners of the house, and it fell upon the young people, and they are dead, and I alone have escaped to tell you. Then Job arose and tore his robe and shaved his head and fell on the ground and worshipped. I'm going to pause right there. A lot of bad news all at once. When it rains, it pours, right? I mean, I can't put myself in one of these circumstances, much less all of them. And obviously his reaction, tearing his robe, the way they mourned was to shave their head and tear their clothes. And he fell on the ground. I imagine he cried, he screamed out. But it says, in worshipped. Talk about steadfastness and faithfulness. in this difficult time, that was his first thing. He grieved, but he worshiped God. Try to put ourselves in our shoes. How would we react? In everything that we see, and there's many, many chapters, he doesn't sin. He doesn't blame God. He's confused. He doesn't understand, but he never sins. And a lot of times we'll do something and go, well, at least we have our health. At least I've got my health. Well, that's what's next. And Satan comes back and he said, well, essentially, that didn't work. And God says, well, you can touch his health. You can make him sick. You can hurt him, but don't kill him. Later on, Job wishes he were dead. Just end it. His wife tells him just to curse God and die. His friends come. They do comfort him for a week. Just sit with him and quiet. But then they're starting to wonder, why is this happening? Eliphaz blames Job. You must have done something to make God mad. You must have sinned. Bildad blames Job's children. I'm sure they've done something. And Job recognizes, hey, I'm not perfect, but this isn't punishment for anything I've done. Me and God are good. He's forgiven me of everything in the past, and I haven't done anything wrong. And he remains steadfast in his own obedience, and he knows that. But he asks God why, essentially, in many chapters. Why is this happening? Why are you doing this to me? And God has to remind him who he is. You don't understand the bigger plan. You don't understand. Were you there when all this was created? And who sustains the world and all these things? Of course, I'm summing up several chapters of Job. But what I want us to understand is when life is hard, we still have choices. Do we choose to be bitter or hopeful? Do we ignore pain or do we face it bravely? Do we run from God or do we run toward God with our questions and fears and prayers? This reminds me of Taylor's invitation last Wednesday, talking about how, we hear that we won't be given anything we can't handle, but we may find ourselves experiencing some things that we can't handle alone. But we have God, and God can handle it, and we can handle it with God. So just imagine just one of these misfortunes. And some of you have experienced a family member or your house or something just destroyed. But imagine that, and then not having family or friends or the brethren, and just being alone. Imagine not having God, even if every human forsakes you. I can't think of Jesus on the cross being forsaken. But imagine doing all that alone without God. Even without anyone else, though, we can put our hope and trust in God, who is faithful, remember we read. There's another Psalm 46. God is our refuge and strength, a very present help in trouble. I thought that was an interesting wording, a present help in trouble. Not like, well, he'll be there. He's here now. And anytime we find trouble, he's ready and willing to help us and be with us. But remember what we read in Deuteronomy, for those that love and keep his commandments. So if we turn away from God, then we're just relying on ourselves during difficult times. If we follow our own lust and desires instead of God's will, then we separate ourselves from God, and we don't stand a chance by ourselves when these trials come, and they will come. Isaiah 59 tells us, we mentioned this in class, that our iniquities have made a separation between you and your God. God doesn't leave us. We leave God. So, had Job's story ended right there, it would still be an amazing story and example of Job's steadfastness and his faithfulness. If he just ended up dying and he lost everything, he still never wavered. I hadn't considered that before preparing for this. We like the good, happy endings, but we don't all get good, happy endings. But we're still expected to be steadfast and trust God. But we know that Job's circumstances improved. We notice while Job was still suffering, he repented of his self-pity and questioning God. I'm going to try to squeeze in Job 42 real quick, just a few verses. First 6 verses of Job 42. Then Job answered the Lord and said, I know that you can do all things, and that no purpose of yours can be thwarted. Who is this that hides counsel without knowledge? Therefore I have uttered what I did not understand, things too wonderful for me, which I did not know. Hear, and I will speak. I will question you, and you make it known to me. I had heard of you by the hearing of the ear, but now my eyes see you. Therefore I despise myself and repent in dust and ashes. When we have just an unbearable time with something, do we go, I see God. I see you now. I see you working. I don't understand it, but I know whatever your purpose is, it can't be thwarted. It can't be undone and distracted. Also, he prays for his friends. Job is the one suffering, but he prays for his friends that were mistaken, that God rebuked. We won't take the time to read that. Job never forsook God. God never forsook Job, despite it appearing like he may have. You may feel like giving up in times like this, but God won't give up on you. Draw closer to him. We have hope. We have eternal hope. John 16:33, I have said these things to you, that in me you may have peace. This is Jesus speaking. In the world you will have tribulation, but take heart, I have overcome the world. There's the hope. We will have tribulation. Here in America, it might be less than others, but we'll have our own tribulations. It's the nature of the world. It's a fallen, temporal world. But Jesus has overcome the world, and God is steadfast in his love for us and faithful with his promises. Our last verse in Colossians 1:21. And you who once were alienated and hostile in mind, doing evil deeds, he is now reconciled in his body of flesh by his death, in order to present you holy and blameless and above reproach before him, if indeed you continue in the faith, stable and steadfast, not shifting from the hope of the gospel that you heard, which has been proclaimed in all creation under heaven, and I, which Paul, have become a minister. So we have been reconciled. We were once alienated. We could be presented holy and blameless if we continue in the faith, stable and steadfast. That means not shifting from our hope that we have in the gospel. That is the gospel, and that is our hope. So my question to this morning is, have we shifted, or are we remaining steadfast? And if you have shifted and we have not been steadfast, God in his promise is still steadfast and faithful, and he will be faithful to forgive us. And if you need to come forward and repent of those sins, you can do so as we stand and sing. Have you